in terms of identifying when performance does dip down, I mean,
Daniel mentioned a roll call.
I think that's up to the other members of the councils.
Yeah,
You know, the other members of the LC to inform the CC that there's issue with a lack of participation of a member.
yeah, I'm really fond of the idea to ingrain this in the general culture, as opposed to setting up new rules and getting somebody to mail everybody. And
well, one thing that we may be able to do as well is, I mean, our team kind of floats around in between these governance organisations, and one thing that we may be able to do is to just check in with each of the boards just every so often, just say, you know, how does everyone feel about how things are running, and then encourage a roll call if necessary.
yeah, I think it would be nice if it was something that came from the individual boards themselves, saying, okay, things get stuck all the time, we have just 3 of 8 people replying on our mailing list, then that's a problem we should look into.
So maybe that message that goes out to the boards can reiterate that point as well. Just reiterate it's, you know, a value in Ubuntu, a leadership value in Ubuntu is if you don't have time, it's a, you know, you should step down, but also we all go through busy patches and it's okay to take some time off to do that when necessary.
Tony actually makes a valid point, we get it an awful lot of the time, is people haven't heard of the Leadership Code of Conduct.
I think this is a problem as well.
And this is a massive problem, because I have to refer to when, you know, as you are a leader, if things aren't going well for you and your team and you've kind of stepped away, you should step down. You're like, why should I step down? I said, because you're a leader now, you're part of the Leadership Code of Conduct. I haven't signed the Leadership Code of Conduct.
I think that's the thing. We enforce signing the code of conduct for lots of things.
But we don't enforce signing the Leadership Code of Conduct. And if you're a leader...
I'm not saying you should have to enforce people. I think that's the reason why people don't know the Leadership Code of Conduct exists.
Yeah.
Is because it doesn't have the prominence
That the Code of Conduct does.
There's a tick box that says you did it.
It seems like it would, signing it could almost be like a formal, you know, this is your oath of office sort of thing, you know.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. So anybody on any of the boards or whatnot. But I also think the Leadership Code of Conduct goes the whole way down the line to team members or a webmaster or a mailing list admin. You know, it's start lower and then work your way up.
But just looking at the councils, just to start off with, one way in which we could do that in a fairly low-tech kind of way is to just say, you know, for example, when we identify a council, let's say the new local council, for example, say, by taking a seat in this council, you are agreeing to enforce this leadership code of conduct, and explicitly having that conversation.
Yeah, but we put that whenever we ask for nominations for a council or a board. I think we give a list of requirements, like you must be available to attend meetings, and you must have signed, or you must have read or abide by the leadership. I'm pretty sure we have that here.
And you must be an Ubuntu member.
Yeah, I've seen it in at least one.
Yeah.
Well, I think part of the problem as well is that we just don't. I think part of the reason why we're having this mini leadership summit is that I just don't think we've necessarily been as good as we could have been about trying to support and maintain quality leadership. Like,
there is actually a bug open somewhere on Launchpad about signing the Leadership Code of Conduct, and I think even just signing to recognise and get people involved by going through the motions, but then they realise they actually have done it and then they can adhere, because people, and that's what sets it different from other people, so we have the Code of Conduct.
I think that's a technical solution to a real world problem.
Yeah.
Which is people are just not doing their work.
I think to me it's like, sorry, Emma.
So what I was thinking was, so coming out of this UDS, it's just a reminder to everyone. The CC emails the other boards CC. Unfortunately, the local council probably has the highest number of people to email the contacts list. But you email those leaders because you got all the leaders that are named, whether it's point of contact or whatever, or contacts list, and just say this is a reminder. And then the teams email the leaders in their team. So it's a trickle down kind of effect.
I think you'd get it filtered at lots of places on the way down.
But at least it would be a first attempt. That would be the first attempt. We identify the gaps, see where those gaps are.
I think the reason why people aren't as aware of it is because we've just traditionally had less of a leadership culture. Like what we've had is we've had the CC forms and kind of does their thing, as opposed to, for example, I think just having these sessions at UDS at every UDS will in itself revive the conversation about leadership more often, and we need to bring it into prominence more often about the expectations. And and also observing when people aren't leading effectively. We need to combat those instances where we can with empathy, you know. So I'm not sure that like ticking a box in Launchpad or even necessarily sending regular reminders out is going to solve the problem so much.
Well, I didn't
think
mean regular reminders, I just meant coming out of this UDS to bring awareness back up.
I think that would be useful, definitely. But I get the impression that it's just like I get the impression that what we want to do and what came out of that survey was there is a thirst for us just supporting leaders in Ubuntu better, like us having more conversations like this. I think has been really interesting just today, just discussing between us as a group and sharing insight into what the challenges are.
But this highlights the thing that I said happens earlier, which is after every UDS there's a mail goes around that, woo, let's, guns blazing, everything's working, and then zoop, before the next UDS.
Yeah, I think we do need that regularity.
But also, I don't believe that just reminding people that the Leadership Code of Conduct as a document is there is sufficient for kicking the backsides of the people who are in leadership positions. Because we all know, all the people I know that are in this room that are in leadership positions know that the Leadership Code of Conduct exists and probably know roughly what's in it, without not quoting it verbatim. But still, we all, are slack sometimes, maybe don't turn up to a meeting sometimes, maybe don't make the most amount of effort to reply to emails sometimes. And part of that's because it's a volunteer position.
Yeah.
And there's no compulsion to do it.
So it seems like what we need to do then is we need to identify when people aren't fulfilling their responsibilities and handle those situations where appropriate, but also to continue to build a culture of leadership in order to. So I think things such as, as an example, one thing I sent to the CC is I have a regular call with the local council, but I don't know why I didn't do this, but I never have a regular call with the CC. Just in terms of syncing our team up and providing some support. Okay. Is that a hand up, Jane?
It is.
Okay.
Before it was a stretch, but now
I was going to say.
Just one suggestion, sorry, I wasn't here earlier, I came in just after the break. From what I've heard, just listening, it sounds like you've got two problems, of the many problems, there are two that have been discussed since I've been in here. One is the people not showing up for meetings and meetings with no agendas, and you still have a meeting if there's nothing on the agenda. And the other, it sounds like what you're talking about now is this being more proactive about setting expectations and responding to problems. But the way it sounds like everything's being configured to be very reactive, like, oh, well, we'll talk about something if somebody puts it on the agenda. Coming from a company that has lots of meetings and a schedule, a calendar that has lots of meetings, I hate going to meetings with no agenda. That's my personal, like, I've got better things, I'm busy and have things to do. But if you want to set the culture and the expectation that people show up at those meetings, you could make sure that there is always something on the agenda. Right now, for the community council, for example, if you laid out the next 12 months that one council comes and talks to you about how things are going every month, then for the next 12 months, you're guaranteed that there's something on the agenda already to begin with. And you've got a more proactive conversation going on with that council, rather than waiting for there to be a problem.
I think you make a good point, Jane. The other thing I think is connected to that is, in many ways, CC meetings, just picking on the CC for a second, are often just considered, I think typically are considered to be meetings where the CC is at service of the community, right? So people raise issues and raise topics, whereas there's not so much discussion about how the CC does its work, as opposed to a team meeting. So for example, when we get together and have our team meeting, we'll talk about the mechanics of the team, how everything works together. Now the IRC meetings are actually a place where we're encouraging people to bring content as well. I'm wondering whether just bringing in, so for example, the points that you've made, Popey, could be great content for discussion at the CC meeting itself, and encouraging.
The CC has done a lot of discussion on the mailing list, which is closed.
Right.
So I think what would be a nice idea would be, as Jane just mentioned, kind of like having each month, once a month, so having, say, the technical board, the membership board, the LC, doing kind of a mini report, because I know team reports are great, but it'd be also a way of the team kind of explaining to the CC, because at the end of the day, they have been nominated and elected by them, saying this is what we've done, this is what we're planning to do for the next few months, and yeah, we're okay, all our members are actually working pretty well, or we actually only 4 of the 6 people actually here because
Yeah.
2 have been
I
kind of
think there's-
missing
I
for the
think
last 2
there's
months.
I think there's a line that you don't want to cross and get too, don't want to micromanage the other councils.
No, but you just kind of, and it's kind of like, it's not your
But
checklist, but it's kind of your,
Yeah,
and it's
just
kinda
having
like
a viewpoint and
attendance.
having a way to talk with them when things are going well, not just
Yeah.
when there's a problem. or-
yeah, because that's the whole thing, is you don't want to be coming to them, we actually have an issue now. You'd rather say, things are going great, we just did approval of 4 teams.
We have
Kudos.
this problem, do you have any ideas of how to help us solve it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So would it be possible on the CC to kind
Sounds
of,
good.
Like the
each
idea.
month kind of say, okay, this month it's going to be the local council for a review, or kind of, not a review is the wrong word, but kind of,
Catch up.
You're
Catch
invited
up.
to our meeting, just invite.
yeah, and just say,
We-
drop in and here you go.
One thing that we do in our, it's different because it's a team call, that we all find really useful, well, I think I do, but these 2 guys who are playing now, is round tables.
So horrible.
So we'll get together with every meeting that we do. Each of us will just go through and summarise what we've done over the last week. I don't think we should do that because that would be, well, I'm setting myself up
Getting
for a fall now, but that would be micromanaging. But I think maybe, yeah, so for example, the LC comes along and says, hey, we've been doing this, identify some issues.
Maybe also not just make it councils, but invite in some of the other groups, so like invite in Ubuntu women occasionally or something like that.
Sure.
So that,
Yeah.
because, there are lots of places that, aren't up to a council level where they could probably use that input, use that feedback. Also, it just gives visibility, reminds people what else is going on in the community.
I'll take a work item to bring this up on the Ubuntu Council Teams list, and
Face meeting tomorrow?
then maybe not for the meeting tomorrow, but for
Okay.
the next meetings.
Okay.
And think about the schedule,
So,
inviting teams.
I do like the idea of
I like
having non-council teams turn up to the community council and have a review, one-to-one kind of thing. But particularly so anyone else can get involved as well. And maybe, give feedback with sort of way.
okay, so Liz is going to send out, just reaffirm the leadership expectations to the CC and to the respective team councils.
And I'll follow up on that launchpad bug.
Let's move on to something else. We've got a big list. Is everyone happy with that?
Grant.
What's next?
Season.
Canonical community? Yeah?
Go
You want to discuss that?
Is the canonical community team part of this? Because it was brought up in the survey and also on this list there.
This is just wider.
Yeah?
Yeah, I mean, from what I read in the surveys, the concerns that people have with the relationship between Canonical and community is born out of a feeling that Canonical imposes decisions on the community without community consultation. That was the general gist. The caveat.
CC does what?
No, not the CC.
Oh, sorry.
No, so the survey had some feedback in it that there is a demotivating attribute felt by some people that Canonical makes decisions without community consultation. One thing to bear in mind in terms of the survey is that people were not asked explicitly which parts of Canonical. I mean, Canonical's a big company, right? So, but there were some people who volunteered that information, and that information was most typically pointed at the design team. So I think a chunk of this is the completely, I mean, this is not a mystery to us, the concern in the community that people feel like they can't influence design. I'm keen to hear everyone's input, but one thing that I've been thinking about a lot recently is that Ubuntu, I mentioned this to a few people this week, I see Ubuntu as a commons, that people can invest in lots of different areas. No one is stopping anybody from fixing bugs and translating and building features, and we have these discussions about design experiences and things like that. Canonical is an entity that invests in big chunks of that community, in big chunks of that commons, but the commons is still very much open to all. And I worry a little bit that because the design focus of a lot of design innovations come out of the design team in Canonical, I worry that if some people feel like that team is less accessible, that the peanut gallery communicates that more of the commons is inaccessible than it actually is.
You say a lot of the design decisions come out of the design team. How many of the design decisions come out of the community?
Quite a lot.
Well, you should have gone to that session today.
Quite a lot. You see, one of the things here, and Aaron made this point recently, is that when people refer to design and community, what they're really talking about is unity. And design.
Well, what they're really talking about is anything I don't like.
And Unity's only been around a year, so really, you know.
They're talking about unity, and unity is.
But I don't think, in terms of design things, certainly actually where the people I represent have had most of the issues dealing with the design team haven't had to do with Unity at all. Haven't even had to do with the desktop, they've had to do with the website.
Exactly.
And so, I don't think the issues, I think a lot of it is that, but some of it's other things as well.
I think this is
But,
really...
I don't know that, one thing I kept saying, I started saying this cycle was that even non-design team stuff, that as someone who is in the community, sometimes I don't know who to contact to reach a team. Even if they're on IRC, I don't know who I need to talk to someone about something really specific.
Right.
And, in Canonical, so I end up poking George, I end up poking you to say, who do I talk to? And one thing that from a community point of view would be really useful is, and it doesn't need to be everybody at Canonical, is some sort of directory just with an email address and what team someone's on.
Yeah,
So that the team, so that someone, I'm not saying reveal personal information, other than
Just a contact point.
Yeah,
Basically saying a directory that we can find.
work email or
who's who.
something, which, once you have a name, you can usually figure out anyway, but, something so you have an idea of who should be getting contacted on something.
Yeah,
That's that
we're working on
page that we're
updating it.
fixing on. the-
Yeah, and related to this, something we started doing in the last cycle, which was kind of successful, but we got sidetracked with a lot of other work, was the idea of having representatives in each of the key teams, particularly in Ubuntu engineering and with the design team, who would be community representatives. So their management has basically said, you will help to get a feel for what's going on in the community, work with the community team, that kind of thing. And I think we could refocus on that a little bit more. So, for example, I think if we had a list of
Right.
200 people, it wouldn't be very useful, but I think if you could say, okay, these are the common,
Right, that's what I'm
we can
saying.
reasonably match it to community teams, right? We can say,
Isn't this what mailing list? You contact the Ayatollah mailing list or the design team mailing list.
The worry is that that is opaque in and of itself, that the people might have a very large discussion on Anitana about something very relevant, and that none of the points raised would be responded to by it.
Or you'll get something where it's a discussion that maybe isn't to a point where it should be public yet, or something like that, where you need, to poke someone, or just poke someone and say, hey, it's finding it came up with a bug where I got poked by GNOME Accessibility saying, this bug was reported back in April, nothing's happened, who do we talk to about this? I had, and it took a while to figure out who we needed to talk to, but it wasn't something that easily went to a mailing list.
Yes.
And, and all of a sudden, all accessibility was broken by one bug because of an update that had to happen upstream.
So Ken actually raises a really good point, because sometimes, and it is kind of frustrating, because I don't want to keep poking George or Daniel going, so I'm looking for somebody in this team, who do I need to go to talk to, because I know they're busy themselves, and they've got to look up the person and find it for me. Having a way to find people in Canonical that work on a certain team, so that they either work on desktop or in a certain area, to know that I can go point to them. I don't want to have to go to a mailing list, to be honest, because chances are it may or may not get answered, or they'll say, go talk to somebody else. And you go round and round and round in a circle.
You get 5 people on the mailing list.
Whereas I know before, when Ivanka left, when I wanted to go talk to somebody in the design team, Ivanka. Now I have to go up, log on to Ayatana and pray to God somebody actually reads my message. And even then, it doesn't happen.
Mine wasn't even a design thing, so, it's not always just the
Just I think communication between the two and finding out who in Canonical people need to talk to from the community point of view would open up so many more doors.
And just beyond us, we know we can just, bother George all day long.
Yeah, I really don't like actually doing it, to be honest.
But we know that we can do this, but everyone else in the community,
I am getting paid.
no one else in the community does. So I have teams that are really frustrated because they don't know, they have no idea who to talk to. They're not, they don't, know who the community team is or anything. So they ask me, and then I need to go find out for them. And, it just, there are people who are not very connected at all.
I get the
They just
impression
feel-
that the canonical related components are really broken into two areas. One is, and I saw some more of this feedback in the survey, one is engagement with specific pieces of canonical, such as just knowing who to speak to or the design, working with the design team. And then the second component is, what is canonical doing? Like it's knowing what the teams are working on. And I get the impression that the latter component about knowing what canonical is doing is something that we can improve on. I sent an email out, I don't know if you remember this, Jay, but I sent an email out to Warthogs about six months ago saying we should all do more blogging, and then I found out that the canonical blogging service was actually broken. So the ISD have fixed it, but I think having a renewed encouragement to various parts of canonical to blog more, I think would be useful. Just to get that sense of visibility, but then in terms of knowing, in terms of the engagement level, it seems like on one hand knowing who's going to be a springboard into a different team is one element, but I also get the impression from the feedback that there is a desire to engage more at a deeper level with certain teams. That
Is there not a public version of the canonical org chart?
Well, so this is interesting. I've got there's sort of a very mixed reaction to it. One is, wanting to know who to talk to escalate certain bugs. There's almost nothing we can do to make the Ubuntu platform team more transparent and more open. Those people are in the community, all of them. It's not just George, it's the entire team that's there. I don't really see how we can practically make a directory that says this person is the desktop person. Like if you know Jason, you know all the people on Jason's team, you know Seth, I'm not sure that's the solution, but I can see how it's hard. On the flip side, I have a lot of sympathy to the I don't know who canonical to talk to about X, because I got to tell you, people in canonical don't always know. We're about 500 people now and growing pretty rapidly, and things change, and we reorganize, and we change team names, and it's.
well, the issue is not just canonical,
I'm not
right?
saying we can't do
Yeah,
that.
it's not just
I mean, it's community as well. Like, I don't know who to talk to about this local team, or it's not.
I think part of it's a starting point for, instead of, I don't know, I understand George is paying for it, but instead of bothering George about everything, have someone from each area who, hey, go talk to them, and who do I
Has a point of
talk
contact?
to?
So
They direct me who specifically.
So I emailed Rick.
So who runs the desktop team in Canonical?
Jason.
But we know that, but
Who
does
runs the
everybody?
server team in
Right.
Canonical?
No idea.
Should we
Like,
be,
those are the people that would be on the list.
Right, and so I emailed, I emailed Rick because the Teams page, it's wiki.ubuntu.com/teams, was so borked with old community teams, canonical teams that didn't exist anymore, canonical teams that got
Should delete
names. I'm working on that now. So I asked Rick, there's so many, the page is huge. So I asked Rick to just fill in the foundations and platform stuff. Rick sent that information back to me so I can fill it in. Now, the next part is the CC getting involved in looking at the community aspect of it, because Liz looked at that page and went, it's bored. I mean, it really is. And so that's our portion of that we need to do. Canonical looked at that, they've given me the contacts, I just have to go fill it in. If you look at that table is so hard to read, that whole page has to be restructured.
I don't think the solution is a web page.
Well, no, but what I'm saying is...
Because all I'm saying is that, the reason why I say that is because I think this is...
Well, you want to put on building community, so...
No, what building community is about building best practice for the community to refer to. But I don't think a list of teams is necessarily best practice. The reason why, so the
But have you
community...
seen it? It's got the point of contacts on it.
No, but the point I'm making is that I think the community, like I say, to me, the Ubuntu community is a commons, and Canonical is a group of people on that commons. Like, knowing who to speak to, whether it's just in Canonical, whether it's in other parts of the community. There's so many teams, our community is so big now. I think in many ways, what we need to instead encourage is a culture of tapping people on the shoulder and saying, who do you think I should speak to about this, this and this? We could arguably provide a bit of a roadmap to it, but traditionally when we've done this in the past, it gets outdated. And we always say, but we won't let it get outdated this time, and it gets outdated.
Well, the other problem is disseminating that information to everyone else to where
Yeah.
everyone knows whatever that roadmap is exists.
But this is part of the reason why I think if we can encourage more blogging and active publication of content from Canonical, it will by definition publicize those names. So as an example,
Only to some degree. When Jane asked who runs this team, who runs that team, okay, Amber, you happen to know that detail, you know.
Because I interviewed them, and I
So, yeah,
I
when
didn't
Russ was
actually-
So if Jane had asked everyone in this room, I'm not sure everyone would have given the same information.
Yeah, I would.
And if you asked everyone out there, they wouldn't have given. And if you asked the people who file bugs, who are users, who are the people who want to be able to, in Penn's example, chase up a bug that's been there for 6 months and doesn't know anything, then those people are so far removed from this room that they have no idea who the right person. So they ask people like me. They go, hey, who can I
Exactly.
ping
But
to
is
chase
that,
this
is that
bug?
wrong that they ask people like you?
No, I'm not, well,
We still end up
it
having
would
to
be
ask.
nice if people were empowered to be able to contact. See, I had a bug recently where something, double-clicking something was broken. I filed a bug and I posted an amusing YouTube video of it, and it was fixed within a week, and it was in like oneric updates straight away. And on my local Loveliest, people commented, oh yeah, you only got that specialist treatment because you're known or you're a celebrity or something like that. And I was like, no, I went and talked to the developer and asked him to have a look at it. Now, other people don't know that that is A, possible, that you can actually go and speak to a developer, and B, they wouldn't even know which developer to speak to.
I just send people to the team list.
Yeah,
Put
but I
that
don't
up on
want,
the desktop list and see if it accidentally got under someone's radar or something.
Yeah, but people don't want to.
I don't want to post to a mailing list to be on storage. I really
If
You
don't.
email them a paper list, but you'll email a person, guy's
An
personal.
individual, like even now, I poke Daniel and say, could you, who's responsible for this or that, because I don't know. And he'll point me to the right person, and I'll go and speak to that person directly.
I think the thing is that participants in the community are intrinsically known to different parts of the community.
Yeah.
I think having, for want of a better description, a telephone directory
Well, we
of
have
the key people, I don't think it's scalable. I think it'd be scalable with a small community
Well,
that
John-
doesn't read very much. But with Ubuntu, just the Canonical. The company, there's people moving around the company, doing different things, switching between different teams. There's all kinds of growth and people joining.
But there
Okay,
are
that's saying
there are
that-
some core things that like I know I can probably go and speak to Bryce about X, and I can probably speak to Pitty about some weird desktop-y thing to do with like Software Center or something. And I know roughly that and I know they will, if I've got it wrong and they've moved to another department, they'll know who to speak to.
No, absolutely. But this is the reason why I'm saying I think it's important that what we do is we encourage a culture where you tap someone on the shoulder and say, how can I, not just about who do I speak to about this, but how do I do this? Like, how do I get started with reporting bugs or whatever it
Do you
might be?
see we have the opposite in the community side of things? We have the local team portal, which lists every team and another team contact. That to me, if I'm searching for Hawaii, I can see log on, click on the person, and that's who they are. Simple, within 3 clicks, I can find that out. And if I click on the local council team page, I can see the list of the current council. If I click on the CC,
But there's a difference there because they're teams, and teams don't generally change.
Yeah,
It's the people and the teams that change. So the leader of Ubuntu Florida may change every
yeah, and that's
every
and the local
6 months.
directory, so it'll.
So the premise of the group, like the docs team is unlikely to go away, Motu is not going to go away, the core dev's not going away.
I was just giving an example how easy
Yeah.
it is to see on the community side of things as opposed to, me personally, if I have an issue and I want to find somebody on the design team, because I'm just going to use them as the example, I'm not going to mail that mailing list, I'm just not.
I think we're
It's probably
overcomplicating this. It took me 4 seconds to look somebody up.
Yeah.
And in that time, I also got a chance to catch up with
Would
you.
buy
You know what? I think we should just set up askgeorge.com.
Right.
Yeah.
That's
No, I mean,
You will never have it.
No, I mean,
Work done again.
Jay, can I follow you on that?
VoIP with a cell phone number attached to the
yeah, surely we got.
I think we're bike shedding
I mean,
it.
yeah, I don't.
Let's move on.
It's not that bad. It's an LDAP lookup.
Okay, I will tell everyone from now on.
No,
Don't
that's
ask
not what
me,
I'm saying.
ask you.
That's not what I'm saying.
Just a quick note, the next session is starting if anyone needs to go to one of the last sessions.
So that's we've spent a bit of time on this aspect of knowing who to speak to. Just so I think some of you weren't in the experiences discussion yesterday, but in terms of specifically the design team feedback that came into the survey, one of the things that we had a session on yesterday was discussing how the community can be empowered in lots of different areas to actually work on design problems. Like basically saying, design doesn't necessarily just equal unity. There's going to be, I think, another session this week about that, and some more discussion about that. But the idea of basically empowering these groups of people, like these teams, to work together on experiences such as streaming music from your computer to your television, or walking up to your car with, a device and triggering something, or whatever it might be, is basically saying these are things that we can actually do, like, because the commons supports the ability to do that. Is there any of the topics, like I've already taken an action, not on this list, but to basically start pestering Canonical staff to blog more.
I have a question, will those blogs go to the Ubuntu planet, or, because where will they go to? Because a lot of people aren't
They'll go
going to
to
check more than just the Ubuntu
They'll go to
planet.
voices.canonical.com for sure.
So it might be worth really advertising where they're going to be blogging.
And if not voices.canonical, well, they'll go to the Ubuntu planet if they're members.
Well, also, we have had requests in the past
To put
to
that
have
logo. Yeah.
teams syndicated on Planet.
Right.
So
Is there a
internal
link to
teams
Voices
and
on
something.
Planet Ubuntu? Because I don't think there is.
Is it what?
I don't think there's a link anywhere on Planet Ubuntu to say, by the way, if you're interested in what people from Canonical are doing, here's Voices,
It's a really good idea.
Yeah.
which would be really, really useful, because it took me a long time to find the
Whoever's
first
taking
time I
notes,
went looking.
I'll take an action to get that.
That would be really
to
good
get that
because
arranged.
I know I'd go to your blog, I go to other people's blogs,
Yeah.
but
I think it's a really good idea. I think it's a really good idea. So, on the topic of canonical and community, is there other topics? How?
Yes, I would like to make a scope closer to the leadership topic. I mean, as a leader, sometimes I had the feeling that I wasn't empowered to be a leader, because if we go in some kind of topics like strategical direction, strategical decision, those information are not public. So it's not about to having a white list of people to asking, but if you ask, they are not allowed to talk with you about this topic.
Can you give us an example?
The recent one is when Mark started talking about the copyright attribution, and he attended to a conference in Yugoslavia somewhere, and people in a conference in Italy was disputing about the thing that copyright attribution leads to dual licensing, and dual licensing leads to having a paid version and free version, so Ubuntu will be going to sell in the future CDs.
Right.
So
you're talking
this
about-
kind of trolling, I think this is kind of trolling, because Ubuntu will be free for the Ubuntu mice, but not having first-hand information prevent me to respond, to answer properly to this kind of things.
Oh, so just to make sure everyone's clear, selfishly myself, to make sure I'm clear. Are you referring to making sure that when decisions are made, wherever they may be, is making sure that everyone has enough information to hand to be able to understand the full breadth of the decision? Is your concern that sometimes decisions are made and you don't really understand the rationale and the reasoning and all that? Is that essentially what you're...
Exactly. Sometimes what happens that we don't know the rationale. Also because sometimes it happens that some information comes out later because they put some strategical... I don't want to say this is wrong, but as I wrote in the survey, maybe just for leaders, also signing a sort of confidential or non-disclosure or agreement, sometimes in some specific situation, we need to know a little bit more than what is public.
That does actually happen
Yeah.
already. In the past, the CC has been sent information which was confidential and were told not to distribute that beyond until a certain date. And the reason that was done was because the people on the CC were seen as leaders of the community, and as such their feedback about how that particular subject should be dealt with in the community when it was passed openly, their feedback could be got. So that does happen, not very widely, because it's tricky. As soon as you make that kind of information available to all leaders in the community, it'll be,
Yeah, I mean, I think a good example was the branding, right? Before the new branding went out, we made a point of talking to CC and just saying, look, this is some work that's been going on. How do you recommend that? So it's more of a collaborative effort. Just say, hey, check it out. And
well, it's not collaborative in the way that we didn't really give an awful lot of input into the design process.
No.
Yeah, we were more talking about how that information can be disseminated.
Yeah. I mean, there is the core issue of the decision itself.
And I also, earlier on when you were saying it would be good if we knew why. So for example, in the example you gave where someone said, oh, there's going to be a paid version. If you just Google that, Ubuntu UDS free, you'll find a page on the wiki that says Ubuntu releases will always be free. And that was written by Mark Shelton. So, and it's on his page, on the wiki. And so there are ways to find out the facts that refute the trolls and the naysayers. But I don't think we can ever have a comprehensive list of the reasons why every decision was made. And I don't think we should strive to, because that would just slow down development if we had to have developers explaining in excruciating detail exactly why every single decision was made.
I think what we can do though is where there are like big decisions, like the switch to Unity.
Buttons.
I would consider that a big decision personally. But big / controversial decisions there. Big force, so examples would be the switch to Unity, the recent Ubuntu Vision announcement from Mark on Monday, the buttons because it was controversial. I think on those things, like my personal goal has always never been to persuade people differently out of their perspectives, but to make sure that there isn't spread of misinformation. I think that's one thing we can actually probably do a better job of. Like, if there's going to be something that is probably going to piss people off, like I often put together what's called a rude Q&A, which is just a list of really, really horrible questions, complete with answers that I give to the team. And I think that actually doing that in a more public setting could be useful to say, okay, so this thing's kicked off, Windows buttons have been moved, where's the rationale, where's the reasoning, and then help to support and dig into the decision making a little bit better. Because I do think it's something that we can improve on it. I think it's getting better, but
Also, one thing we forget too is that we're a huge project, and even though some of us are employees, that doesn't mean like we know what's going on either, right? Like when I got hired, the first thing I did was on the internal wiki. I was like, oh, I can't wait to see it, and there was like nothing there. It's like boring OEM crap, right?
a good example of that is the copyright assignment stuff. It has been terribly presented, internally, externally, in every possible way. No one really gets it.
I got in an argument last UDS with Mark about it for 40 minutes after a session, and I still don't get it, so.
We'll put it this way, I've been hearing nothing about it since it was originally proposed.
Right.
And then I had a conversation with him the other day, and it made a lot more sense.
Yeah.
Like a lot more sense.
So the way I'm kind of trying to answer your question is we also don't know what's going on with certain things sometimes. So if that makes you feel better, we don't.
And there's also sometimes
we don't usually like hide, all employees. Here's a secret. Make sure he doesn't know or whatever.
The other thing
for
is,
some things, the blog will update on Planet, and I was like, whoa, I guess we're doing a font.
the other thing is,
Sorry, I would like to bring another contribution. Somebody said that happen at our meetings, so where Ubuntu member, not just somebody in the streets, that it happens that they know things about Ubuntu, relevant changes about Ubuntu from Omagad Ubuntu, not from the plan.
Yep.
Yeah.
And this is something that is felt like wrong.
No, I learn about my politicians from a magazine called Private Eye. I don't want my politicians telling me how the politicians work, because I won't believe them. I would much rather learn from a third party who sees it impartially, differently, and can explain it to me in a way that I'll understand.
That's how I find out what other people at Canonical are doing. It's on OMG.
Yeah,
Yeah, but sometimes I think the canonical stuff is going via OMG first, then the Planet Ubuntu.
Well,
Yeah, but Planet Ubuntu is just a syndication of blogs.
it's not a news service.
But I think sometimes, well, I've seen some articles that appear kind of there first, and then
That's because
appear on Planet Ubuntu.
Yeah.
Not mine, baby. I got mine timed, so I hit click.
Bridge and
Yeah, she was all in my face about that. I
Put it
got it
this
all
way.
syndicated. It's like,
Just so everybody knows, we have a policy in our team. We have a great relationship with the OMG Ubuntu guys. But for example, Daniel's weekly developer reports, and when George was doing the Unity ones, the requirement is that the empirical source of that content is on the fridge. And the OMG article will be reposted and linked back to
But
the fridge.
Planet Ubuntu sometimes is a bit slow about picking up the news.
yeah, it's
I think
like
that's
15 minutes
I
at
think
work.
that's the main thing.
Yeah, I think that's
Just the other thing, just as a side point, I mean, I think one thing that is often an elephant in the room in terms of Canonical and community is Canonical is a business, right? And it's there to make money, and by making money, it's actually making money to further Ubuntu. I mean, no one's pockets are getting lined in any of this, right? So I think it's important to remember that sometimes, in terms of decisions that are made, transparency sometimes isn't a commercial advantage.
Yeah.
And you have to have a commercial advantage to be successful sometimes. And I think sometimes we treat companies like we treat open source projects where such a lack of transparency would obviously be unacceptable for a company. Sometimes my ethical perspective on this is so long as that lack of transparency is furthering Ubuntu's mission, then I think it's okay from time to time, particularly when it doesn't necessarily involve or implicate the community in certain ways. So, as an example, Canonical may release a set of designs out of the blue, but part of the reason for that is probably because the hardware manufacturer is saying, we want to ship this.
Yeah.
And that's good for Ubuntu because it gets it in the hands of
Right.
people.
The way I explain that to my local team, it's like, once you move into shipping stuff on devices, it's a totally different world from what we're used to. And that's just par for the course for playing the game. It's like, well, we finally can get some OEM preloads and all that stuff, but as a result, that means that OEMs will pay for exclusive stuff for 6 months, and
So
it
you know what,
lands eventually in Ubuntu.
I was a day late for UDS, so I flew out on Monday. The first website I went to was only what happened yesterday, because I knew they'd happened.
So
But that's
the,
okay.
the controversial stuff that creates panic in the community is not the OEM related stuff to my experience, right? Like the stuff Canonical is not transparent about that everyone completely appreciates, hardware that's not public yet, vendors and all this sort of stuff that we sort of expect to be private. The stuff that people are upset about a lack of transparency is things that feel like decisions from on high, like,
Yeah, but you've got to bear in
We
mind
just
as
mad
well.
about the buttons, dude. Maybe Dell paid us like $1 billion.
But you've got to bear in mind that, look, again, referring to the elephant in the room is that most software development done in open source is done by companies.
yeah.
And it's done by companies who are creating products for other companies, right? That's where all the Linux development basically comes from. All of this work, all of this focus on design and this kind of stuff, I mean, this won't happen if we can't get companies to ship Ubuntu. If we were Fedora, we wouldn't be able to do, if we had no interest in striking OEM relationships, then we wouldn't be able to invest the resources into building these things. So I think it's a balance. I think it's okay sometimes to cut Canonical a little bit of slack in terms of this, because the thing that I think is inappropriate is when we are making decisions that step outside of the ethical commitment that we've made in Ubuntu. Like, I can understand why people were so annoyed about the Ubuntu One naming thing. Because that was very, very different for Ubuntu. That was a real milestone in the project. But creating new interfaces or creating new free software, I think sometimes we should sometimes just kind of cut Canonical a little bit slack. And I'm trying to speak mentally as someone, there's in my volunteer capacity.
I get personally that Canonical, at the end of the day, you're trying to, any fundraising they do eventually benefits us all, to be honest. I mean, the likes of having UDS is a beneficial thing. But it's when decisions happen that are, say, not public, so if they're not happening on IRC, they're not happening on a public mailing list, and they go, ta-da, that's when mayhem happens. And I get that they also have to keep things to themselves, but it's because you can't understand the thought process. You can't see, this person said this person said this, and then you see the reaction, and that's why you have the decision. That's when I think community will kind of get a bit cranky.
I don't think there is a lack of response controls. I think Canonical typically, maybe I'm just trying to infer this because typically I have to deal with a lot of the controls.
So briefly, it's your job, so if there isn't a lack of response, then maybe it's your
some
problem.
things, one of the challenges for me is that me responding to something can often inflate the shitstorm. So sometimes it's best to just kind of like leave it, and then if it gets bigger, then it sometimes needs a response. But I don't know. I mean,
I don't even deal with controversy. I just
John, for making an improvement of the situation, what we can do from a local team perspective, or in the next frame, writing to the CC, writing to you, writing to Mark directly.
about what?
If the next frame we will face,
Oh.
what we can do, who we can have in touch to have, I don't know, it's right to keep something confidential, but maybe keeping confidential, you can answer the question. So you are not telling me what you are going to do, but you can tell me what you are not going to do.
I think
so we can understand what, unless we are not able to.
if there's questions in your local team, or if you have questions, just ask.
Just get in touch with us.
just ask Danny.
I mean, if it's something about, I don't know, broader Ubuntu community, whatever, send it to the community council. We know who to ask. And if you feel like that there needs to be like a public response to something, ask for it.
One interesting piece of feedback in the survey, as I mentioned earlier on, regarding the bickering and the flaming and people getting all frustrated, was, and I mentioned this earlier on, was the frustration about people who flame and bicker and complain, yet don't contribute to anything.
Right.
And I think one thing that I'd like to see is, I don't think we should build an environment where you can only criticize if you've done something. I don't think that's healthy, but I think we should build an environment where when you do contribute, you've got credibility. Like, there's too many people, I think, that flame, criticize, and shout and blah, 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 who don't really have any credibility. They just got a loud voice. So, a good example of this in my mind is Scott Kitterman. Scott Kitterman is really critical at times about things that we do in Ubuntu. But he has oodles of credibility. Like, when we go through the UDS sponsorship thing, he's always at the top of the list in terms of people that we want to be here. Because he's got a ton of respect, no matter how quickly.
I was just thinking that this is something that I think is an internal issue as well as an external Canonical, because, I noticed the comment in the survey from the person who said, I work at Canonical and I'm paid to speak up. And I've heard that from multiple people, and that worried me too. I think of multiple people I knew who could have made that comment. And, I think that's something that maybe needs to get, there's not necessarily much people outside Canonical can do about that, but that may need to be something that comes up internally.
I think one thing that is getting harder to deal with, is that there is, I think, a growing feeling in Canonical that the community is increasingly intolerant, and it makes Canonical people not want to deal with it.
That's a really sad thing to see, though, to be honest. And I don't like seeing that, to be honest, because I would rather a Canonical person come to me and say, Laura, look, bit stuck here, don't know what to do, who do I need to talk to? And I would rather that then.
But the point is
yeah, but I'm not even saying, because the comment I was talking about that was in the survey was someone saying, I'm here for my job if I say something.
Oh,
What was the
objective,
context of
yeah.
I've had,
It was, there are things that Canonical has said, has done that I disagree with, but I feel that if I were to speak up, it would impact my job.
that seems crazy to me.
I've
heard
had
it from other
canonical
people, and
people
so I
leave
don't
to
know
me.
why,
Huh?
but
I think the community also needs to bear some responsibility on this, because
Yeah.
every time something goes wrong, the community at large is the first person to kick Conoco under the bus and quick. And I think that creates a really bad friction point between Conoco and the community, where Conoco's like, well, no matter what we do, we're gonna get kicked under the bus anyway.
Yeah, I get yelled at all the time.
It's tricky though, because there's community and then there's community.
Yes.
There's like the people
And
who are
I'm talking
here.
about community, not community.
Yeah,
community
and
of
then
members
there's
or
people
community of
who are on
everybody?
the end of that listening, and then there's people who read OMG, and then there's people who use Ubuntu and never participate at all, and just read about it on a thing, and then there's YouTube commenters,
And,
and then
the,
further out.
the
there's
issue
4chan.
is that there's not very many people in any layer of the community that's willing to step up and try to not put down, but try to negate what the trolls are trying to do.
So I think, I mean,
I think it creates a very friction layer of mistrust between the two entities
But this,
because of that.
this is why I mentioned the circles. I think we have to be careful who we're listening to. A lot of people are very loud and way out at the edges, and because they have an Ubuntu PC somewhere in their house, feel that gives them carte blanche to go hell for leather at any canonical employee they don't like.
but I think this is one of the, I think you're completely right, Toby, but I think this gets to the bickering feedback in the survey. It's very demotivating, not just for community members, but for canonical staff as well. I mean, I'd say that, like, there's a bunch of people in this room who I've known for years, right? And I'd say that every one of those people has got pretty thick skin, right? So when we see some of this outer circle rambling, like, you think, okay, whatever. And you try to, like, the criticism that comes from people who do contribute, who do have respect and credibility, I think then really resonates. Like the fact that you raised the topic in that CC meeting because of your credibility, for me personally as a community manager, instantly it put it top of my priority list because you have the credibility. If it was someone random, like, it would be different because the credibility plays an important part. The thing is, though, is that I do think that we have a responsibility in our community to try and nip these things in the bud, which is kind of what you're getting at to, Duck. You know, but
When did Mark talk about this recently? About we shouldn't have to tolerate this, you know, the kind of peanut gallery. Where was it? On a CC meeting?
I think so.
It was very recently. He explicitly said, you know, we're very tired of this.
I'd like to know.
We shouldn't.
It's antisocial.
I think it was the most recent CC meeting. It's publicly not.
I tell you what, the one thing I'm going to do, if someone could write this down, sorry I'm being lazy with the notes, to Pendulum's point is I think that it would be healthy for a leader in Canonical, and I'm going to talk to Mark possibly about this, or Jane, to just reaffirm that you are free to share your opinions. You don't get fired for having opinions. You get
So-
fired for misconduct, but you don't get fired for having opinions.
I really wanted to talk about that. So I've had canonical staff on multiple occasions feel like they're leaking something to me by telling me what they honestly felt, right? And that they were not free to share this in the environment of their job or whatever. It was something they disagreed with, or something perhaps, you know, Mark was personally attached to, or this sort of thing. And it just went against the whole spirit of a culture of openness, and they needed to have this discussed. And last UDS, I sort of raised this point with Mark during his Q&A or whatever, and he said something that was very inspiring. He said, you know, no one at Canonical has ever been fired for disagreeing with me. And then he ruined it completely by saying, you know, that's not an invitation, right? Which was a joke, but it kind of went over very poorly.
Tongue in
I heard. Yeah. And so I wouldn't mind disagreeing with Mark, even if I worked for him.
I think
but,
the thing there is, I think a lot of this is really the culture of Mark, the cult of Mark Shuttleworth. Because there's Canonical staff members who you know, when people join Canonical, people share all these stories about, I mean, we were about to get into this, you know, when people join Canonical, people share stories about what goes on and what different managers are like, and what Mark's like, and what James is like, all this kind of stuff. And
Already happened.
yeah, and I think that it's like the old saying, you know, nothing's ever as bad as it is, and nothing's ever as good as it is, you know. And I think that sometimes when people will confide in other people about, I'm leaking something, it's that they don't want to get on Mark's bad side. Whereas in reality, we all know what he's like. He's passionate, both in a good way and a bad way, and I think that's the reason why people sometimes feel that way. I don't think it's a canonical culture. I think it's just a
Yeah, I mean, everyone's not. I'm very thick-skinned and have no qualms about voicing these sorts of things. And you know, maybe people are shy, maybe they're legitimately afraid. It doesn't really matter, right? Either way, we can benefit from making this openness more.
I think
clear.
reaffirming that though would be good, you know, in the company, because I think we're getting to that size where a lot of people. I mean, like Popey made the point about the circle. You know, when Canonical started, everybody who joined knew open source inside out. Everybody knew who he was. And now we're getting all these other people who are coming in from the outside circles who, you know, when the company's bigger, the execs seem much further up, right? And I think that's maybe part of the reason why this is brewing a little bit. But I think that's actually something we've been nipping in the bud recently. I'd be more than happy to speak to the execs about that. So, we have about 30 minutes.
So what did Mark say at the CC meeting?
Well, he also alluded to that, I think, in the keynote. I don't remember the exact quote, but I thought in the keynote here,
What the cool kids are doing, you mean, I think?
Yeah, he did say something.
No, the thing about Linus, you know, get a video of him, but we'll have to mute it. It makes you think, does he want to hear what Linus has to say? Or did he mean, you know, is he going to swear his head off and, you know...
I think that was just a joke that Linus would be like,
yeah, I think probably.
we've got 30 minutes left. Do we maybe want to cover another one of these topics, or is there anything else canonical? I don't want to cut this if people want to keep talking about the canonical community relationship.
I guess one thing is, so we brought up that community needs to take responsibility for some of it, and really by community we mean the core community, it seems, because let's face it, we have absolutely no control over what gets posted in comments on Oh My God, or, you know, YouTube, or anything like that. Or the forums.
Well, in
You know,
theory, we have
and, you know, what about talking about ways that we can then respond to that? Because certainly it's something that will slightly get better with better communication all around. But, you know, what do you say when when somebody's come, you know, I've actually mostly only heard it on truly controversial issues, but where somebody comes and says, is complaining about this, oh, the canonical is bad because of X, Y, Z, and you don't know the rationale yet.
Well, I've seen in public places like OMG, like YouTube and other like public forums, I've seen canonical employees, including Sladen, NPT, and others that I can't remember, and that some Castro do, jump on and rebuff comments.
Right, I'm saying, what if you don't have that information yet? So
Sorry?
what if the comments are ones where you can't easily rebuff them yet? You know, how do you deal with that?
Ask for more information from somebody who might know.
Ask them for more information what they're talking about, and when they stumble over themselves, they'll reveal themselves for the idiots they are.
I think a lot of this is dependent on your personality as well.
I like that approach.
Yeah, because I
just-
tend to like get too into it on Oh My God or something, but I'll get personal emails saying, this is a real problem, I'm leaving Ubuntu, does Canonical even care about this? At which point I have to go back and say, yes, Canonical cares, yes, I know this is an issue, and sometimes I don't even necessarily know why it happened. So.
Yeah, I mean, that's when I come into the community team channel and ask. And then I can reply to their email, because I get emails like that all the time too. So.
Yeah, like when you asked about that Unity launcher thing or whatever.
Yeah.
Pointed you to the right bug.
So it seems related to an issue I was discussing in the last CC meeting, which is that one of the points of friction between Canonical and the community has been sometimes about expectations rather than actual work. And so people are expecting Canonical to take responsibility for certain things, and Canonical doesn't or shouldn't, but that is not always communicated back. So an interesting example is where Canonical is the upstream on certain projects, like say Unity, and someone says, "Oh, here's a bug in Unity and it's a problem," and Canonical is not going to spend engineering time on that, but would be completely open to a fix and acknowledges it's a problem. But that latter message may not be communicated. So because it goes unfixed, people say, "Oh, Canonical doesn't care," right?
We see this all the time. I see this all the time with teams, like saying, this is clearly an issue, but I can't get this. I can't get anyone from Canonical to respond to it.
Right.
Like I've seen this with Unity, I've seen it with the accessibility team, I've seen it with the docs team, like various teams who will say, this is clearly an issue. And what's inferred there is that Canonical's there to fix these bugs. And if he doesn't fix these bugs, then Canonical is being a bad steward of Ubuntu. And I think it is important to remember,
to speak constructively, what inspires me here is if the Mono project, for instance, has a really good set of wiki pages about stuff that would be great to have, that we would love patches welcome from the community, and we're going to spend absolutely no time on them, right? And we're larger than a single project, so we would need something more comprehensive. But just if this was, clear somehow, right? Whether the solution is bug tags or wiki pages or whatever, it's something that would solve a good chunk of discomfort. Right?
I think part of it, though, as well, kind of being a little bit negative. I know Mark, I remember Mark was talking to you about this, Scott, at the last UDS, is that I'm increasingly seeing more and more in open source and in Ubuntu, just an anti-company culture. Just a complete cynicism towards
I don't know that
companies.
it's increasing. I think it's always been that way.
I guess maybe
Canical's getting bigger, so
Yeah.
Now a company, right?
Now
put
they're
it this way, I deal with a lot more anti-canonical things than I ever have done. And maybe part of that is because Canonical's making a lot worse decisions. I mean, it could be...
No, because you make a valid point. There's reasons I don't use identity anymore, because people were just using the tag too much. It's like, really? I know you're Fedora, or I know you're Debian, or I know you're whatever group. That's your choice, but stop slagging it off. You just have to unfollow it, to be honest, because it just got beyond the point if you were on Identica, because they would just keep...
Yeah, that's why the whole worthless is... That's
why I don't use Identica anymore, it's just got beyond it. And same with Google Plus.
Yeah.
You can just see the anti people, and you're like, mute.
Yeah, I mean, this is really tough because it's a cultural thing, and I think one thing that would be nice for us to do as a community, because you know how we said that the CC sets the example for the rest of the governance boards? I get the impression that the people in this room, everyone who's in this room is here because everyone here cares about the community, cares about Ubuntu and doing the best we can. And I think if we and other people who are in similar kind of positions can just encourage a culture of not accepting bad conduct from companies, but also accepting, being a little bit more, I think just being a little bit more trusting in all ways is something that, it's a hard one because it's not like we can make a wiki page or put together a process to solve this problem. I think it's about more transparency from Canonical will help a lot, just getting people talking about stuff a lot more. A good example of this was I talked to Mark last week about, and this was some feedback that I heard from a bunch of people, was that when people come to UDS and they sit in the audience, and we're here to build the next version of Ubuntu, we're here to build 12.04, and you're here to feel like you're part of that mission, particularly if you're from the community. And then Mark gets up and says, "This is what we're doing." That's actually really demotivating. It's a really subtle thing. So I asked him to make a point of saying, when he's talking about the vision, is to say, this is where Canonical is investing in the commons. This is not necessarily Ubuntu. This is where Canonical is investing. I'm not entirely satisfied with the way, I don't feel like he could have communicated that as effectively as I would have liked, but...
It's probably because it's on day one he's setting the tone for the week, whereas if you'd said it on Friday...
But he's also really receptive to that message as well. I mean, it's just, when you get up and do a presentation, you sometimes forget to text and stuff, but I think that's just such a subtle point that then it's not saying, all the decisions have been made, new people can fix all the bugs, It's actually that this is still very much a collaborative environment.
One thing
I'll
that
take
ties
that.
to that, and I haven't seen it in a while, maybe it's happened and I've just missed it, but there hasn't been a marked Q&A for a while.
There was last.
No. We do them every cycle, except this cycle, he was traveling, so we have an agenda, us three, to reschedule that.
I'm assuming you're talking about the open week.
The open week, but also at UDS and.
At
yeah.
UDS we did
yeah.
it one time.
Yeah, I
Just
remember
last
I was
time.
in that one, but
Yeah.
yeah, I
But
didn't
this is
see
the
it.
first time since the project started that Mark missed an Ask Mark.
Yeah.
I think we should.
So that might be having an effect too, because people really want to hear what, I think,
Oh yeah,
they want to hear what Mark has to say.
I'll take an action to talk to him about that.
Yeah.
To get on schedule this week.
The only problem with that I've seen is that it always seems to be the same questions asked.
We try, and I've moderated those sessions before,
Yeah.
and we try and pick out, we try and be intelligent about the questions we pick out, because it is a fire of questions that come in,
Yeah.
and you like pick them off and try and pick them, and you sort them, and then
Yeah, and then-
people nag you because you didn't pick them.
Yeah, and then I try to pre-screen them, because like, look, you're gonna get a chance to talk to Mark Shuttleworth. He's not gonna know how to fix your Flash problem. So, try to be, people do that all the time. They're like, why my Firefox old or whatever. It's like, dude.
Well, the other thing though is get over it, the buttons are staying on the left. Stop asking about it. I understand that you still have,
Well, luckily,
Well,
other people
but-
contribute in that chat channel, and
Right.
they answer them sometimes before Mark does.
Right.
Yeah.
And if I see that happen, I'll strike it and use the next one.
Yeah,
I would
it's
say that really depends on the audience that will attend that. Because I clearly remember during the Banshee issue, there was a community council around at that time. And I attended it. And honestly, I think Mark was alone from the CC. And it took his time to answer all the questions. But the questions were not about how do I can fix my issue with Flash or something like that. The issue was raised by people from the community to ask him all details about that. And clearly it was a real discussion. And I think it really helped to solve all the problems. Well, you did a lot of work too, you and George. I mean, some clause that was still here, everything was fixed. Or at least all the positions were explained.
I think one of the problems that we have as well is, and I see this every week on those Q&A video things that I do, is there is just a lot of misinformation about what we do. Like every week, why aren't you shipping GNOME 3? Like we do, we ship it in 11. But we don't ship GNOME Shell. We ship GNOME 3 as a platform. But it's just like, it's the peanut gallery, that kind of churns the message around, and I think that's just, frankly, it's just part of communities to a degree.
One thing that you're doing that I think a lot of other Canonical employees could emulate is using the video channel more. Like we don't get to see that as a community. We don't get to feel that personal interaction. That chat room is much different than a video channel.
It's tricky because video lends itself to certain types of people, and John knows someone who can sit in front of the camera and babble for an hour and answer people's questions, just as they come in.
Yeah.
Whereas some others, they don't feel confident doing that. And a lot of them are fantastic, excellent developers, great at what they do, but put a video camera in front of them, and then they're not so hot. And I wouldn't want to pressure people who don't feel comfortable.
Maybe it's an opt-in though. I mean, there are some leaders within Canonical, executives, managers, whatever, who would probably feel comfortable, and that would at least create a dent in the issue.
Yeah.
I suspect they get...
Like not everyone's a show person like Joe, but I'm sure there's others.
One of the biggest challenges as well is, just speaking about Canonical again, like people in Canonical are just so busy and so massively overworked that one of the things that I find more and more challenging is that, like, when I compare the Canonical that I joined to the Canonical of today, like back then it seems like we were just kind of just sitting around hanging out and playing, Hungry Hippos, compared to what we're doing today, which is like everyone's just got so much stuff to do, and this, that, the other, and it's just a constant stream of work. So trying to identify areas where Canonical staff members can be more transparent and work with the community while also delivering on all the stuff that they're overworked on is more and more of a challenge. So identifying areas where people can kind of kill two birds with one stone, I think, is useful. So as an example, like our IFC meetings are actually killing two birds with one stone now for me, because when we have our meeting and I have my management meeting and I do my round table, I can actually just use the meeting log to pick out the key points. So it actually really helps me. And I'm trying to think of ways in which we can do that with the rest of the thing.
One thing that, okay, so Canonical employees are very busy during their working day, and the community would like Canonical employees to spend a bit more time doing community stuff. Those people in the community are also busy doing their jobs,
Yeah.
whatever they may be, non-Ubuntu, non-Canonical, yet they take time out to go and do things for the community.
Yeah.
Should we not be encouraging Canonical employees to be doing the same thing that we ask of the community, which is
No.
spend time doing
I don't think so.
community stuff?
Because not everybody who's working at Canonical is doing
I'm not saying everyone. I would expect
like a lot of people who work at
HR people or something to be doing that.
Yeah, I mean, a great example is the kernel team. The kernel team, to be practically honest, have no interest in the community. They ship a kernel. They're like dyed-in-the-wood, hardcore software engineers. I think it's different with people like Seb and MVO. Like you see a lot more of this. Like the desktop team is a little bit different, you know. But the OEM team, they, you know, I think that's part of the challenge. Is the issue in Canonical in terms of community outreach is it's got nothing to do with most of the company, like the company who are naturally inclined towards community, because those people do it anyway, like James.
No, but surely you're using I don't have enough time as an excuse for not doing community-related involvement, which is something any of us, me pre-working with Canonical, anyone who doesn't work Canonical could use that same week.
No, what I'm saying.
I'm looking forward to hearing your answers in 6 months.
What I'm saying is that
I think Alan Bell has a really good point, that if people who are doing stuff that affects the community, especially on Ubuntu specifically, they don't have any value with the people who are also putting extra time in out of their own lives, that is an issue.
it's not about that there's no value, it's about that other things are a priority. So what let me try and be clearer. So let's use Seb as an example, right? Seb is passionate about Ubuntu, passionate about the community, and he makes time, right? And it's just part of his DNA, okay? I think that other people in Canonical who aren't interested in the community, they're interested in their whatever they've got to do, asking those people who have their job to deliver and asking them to do something, to make extra time for something that that doesn't naturally align with them, that's where the hard work is. I'm not saying we shouldn't do it, I'm saying that we should do it. I'm just saying that's the reason why it's hard. Like I think there is a perception in parts of the community that people are actually really interested in the community, want to participate in an open source manner, and not allowed to. And in reality, that's not the case. Like if you look at the vast majority of the Ubuntu engineering team, everybody works out in the open. Everybody is just like the folks here at UDS. But it's different in the OEM team. It's different in corporate services. It's different in, it's different in the design team. And that's all I'm saying. I'm not saying that these aren't problems we should solve. We should solve them.
I just think Poke makes a really valid point that if it's the likes of people who do their 9-to-5 day job, most of us at work still are on IRC and still, answering Ubuntu questions. We're doing our own day job, getting paid for that as well, and doing Ubuntu community work at the same time.
Sure.
It would be nice if the same was happening, vice versa.
I agree, but I don't think it's reasonable to say this is your day job and you've got to make it your hobby as well.
Not your hobby, but interact more with the community is what I'm saying.
But can I comment on that? So can see it from both sides. Having my interest in the community, and my husband works for Canonical. He travels at one time. There were 3 months. I saw him 15 days out of 3 months, and there weren't 15 consecutive days. If you thought for those 15 days he was going to talk about Ubuntu, you're wrong.
Yeah.
You are so wrong. And when they travel that much and we don't see them as family, I'm not going to say go to a local meeting.
Yeah,
even if I'm
asking
going.
people to do community stuff like on their off time is a sure way to make someone like burn out.
To be brutally honest, when I work long days like everybody else. When it gets to 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night, when I'm done with work, I want to play guitar. I want to chill out. I don't want to be going out to a lug. And there's fluctuations. Like sometimes
you've taken this from where we were talking about sitting in front of the computer with a video camera. to leaving the house and going to a low.
No, well, what I'm saying is that I think it's when you invest the amount.
I know the point you're making, and I appreciate it, and I understand that the people work long hours, and it's hard to put this extra stuff in. I can appreciate it. I just wonder if we shouldn't use that excuse, because then why would the community? Why would anyone in the community?
And I think you've got a valid point. I don't think it's that we should expect that they do. Hearing what you're saying, I think it's more that if they don't, they shouldn't use, hey, I'm really busy at my day job as an excuse.
Right.
Don't draw, because that's not a valid excuse. I'm not really interested in the community, is also painful to hear, too, but don't give an excuse.
Yeah, Matt Zimmerman wrote a great blog post about this, when he says, I can't remember, I'm paraphrasing, but he said something along the lines of, if you say to me you're too busy to do something, what you're actually doing is you're reprioritising the thing I asked you to do below everything else that you've got on. So it's not that I'm too busy, it's that what you want me to do is lower than everything else.
And then, with you saying you like to play guitars, I personally feel you're sharing your hobby with us, even though it has nothing to do with Ubuntu. Still allows us to get to know you better as a person. And if a design team person wanted to say, here's some of my doodles, this is what I like to do on my off time, I think that has value, even though it's not necessarily doing any work for the community. It's giving us a piece of that personal connection to see the person as a person, not just someone who works at Canonical and makes my interface.
And I want to reiterate, I don't think that this is a reason not to encourage community participation.
Right.
But I think that the community looks at everyone in Canonical like we look at ourselves. And everyone in Canonical isn't like ourselves. It's like everyone at Red Hat. It's like everyone at IBM. Everyone at Novell. There's a lot of people who are interested in participating in the community, and I think that we should try and encourage that as a culture and as a value. But I don't think it's reasonable to actually say, well, just because somebody isn't interested in doing that, particularly on the outer edges, that we should demand that we should try and make an unnatural push towards that.
I agree with Alan, but I think that the idea is not to force people to do anything on the spare time. But like you said, you encourage Canonical people to blog.
Yeah.
You said that.
Yeah.
I said, maybe you can say, okay, maybe you can say the same message saying, okay, if you have time and if you are interested, maybe take part of the community. There's nothing imposed here. But when you said that nobody from IBM is imposed to take part of the community, but IBM is not asking the community to do something.
Well, what I'm saying is that if they've got their work, if you've got, let's say you're at work for 8 hours a day, and what I'm saying is if your 8 hours of work are not community facing in what you do, I mean, I think what we're trying to encourage is that it can be community facing where it makes sense, but if it isn't community facing where it makes sense, while I appreciate the fact that a lot of our community go to work and then do community stuff on the side as well,
Or at the same time.
I don't think it's necessarily reasonable to say, okay, well, you need to do your community work on your off hours. Because much as I think it would be nice if they did, and many of us work outside of our off hours, it just, like Adam said, it just won't happen.
No, I do get that, I do, but the issue is, for me personally, when I'm asked an example when they go for membership meetings and they're Canonical staff, and I'm going, do you realise there's actually a logo in your area? And they're going, what's a logo? Why would I want to get involved? It's cringeworthy in many ways.
But why
and yet,
should you be expected to go to a loco if you want to be a member, if you want to do it if your expertise is in another area?
I'm just giving you an example. So, from a local point of view, they love to meet Canonical folks. It empowers them to get involved.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
It does work. I fully appreciate that they are working 9 to 5 and traveling and whatnot, but so are also those people. But if they attended one meeting in one cycle, do you know the effect that actually has on a community? So for them to attend one event or
I do,
something.
because Rick Spencer came to one of my events one time.
Yeah, when
it just lit up the whole
to
community.
Dublin and they sprinted and went along to the hackerspace, we got 3 new people in our team.
Yeah.
That made such a difference to the logo.
Okay.
I was just thinking, maybe the solution isn't saying do this on your own time, it's figuring out how to make it work within, those working hours. For example, one of the reasons it works so well, one of the reasons I don't feel so, distanced for the desktop team is actually a good example of this, is because their own IRC while they're at work, therefore you can ping them, and, and I don't know, I know that that's considered an issue with the design team, but I don't know how many other teams that is or isn't an issue. Design team's certainly not the only team I've heard that people sometimes have trouble if they try to find someone.
Launchpad team and Ubuntu One are brilliant teams.
But I also know that one thing, this is something that, again, when I was reading all the leadership survey responses, I was sitting here thinking, because a lot of feedback was things like, I saw several things that commented on weekends being an issue in terms for community-wise, and I sat there and said, this could be a major policy problem for Canonical, and this is just, is it possible to offer people a flexible work week so that somebody maybe doesn't work Tuesday but works Saturday or something like that, and that's obviously a much bigger issue than anything we could bring up, but something where there's that sort of thing so that there's a little bit more overlap, because I think weekends are some time when people feel like everybody at Canonical's gone home.
Yeah.
If they have a question, we can't get anything, it might actually be a roadblock and something we're working on. And I think it is where some of the disconnect comes in, and that's why I'm saying make it easier within the job rather than it being this whole separate thing you have to do outside.
I'm reasonably confident that the people like us who care about community at Canonical are actually reasonably generally pretty decent about working in a fairly transparent way. I mean, there's some people more and less than others, but I think that when we see people wanting, I get the impression that when the community says we want to see more about what Canonical is doing, it's a combination of us folks just generally talking more about. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that our team does that we don't talk about, not for any reason, we just don't get around to talking about it. But then on the flip side, there is the corporate services team, there is the support team, there is the OEM team, the L3 team. There's all of these other teams that are a combination of they can't talk about certain stuff because they're business deals, or they are just not in line to the community. And I think that's, to me, the areas where there's people there who aren't aligned is a good area of focus, but it's just difficult to fit it in with people.
I like the suggestion of Cheesehead. I'm not convinced if the CC should be doing it, but I like the idea of inviting people to do something. Inviting people to an ISC meeting, to the local event, to
The
ask.
problem with that, though, is that I have no idea if anyone from Canonical works anywhere near me.
Sure, that's a separate problem, but you can just ask somebody. But
Show up in Orlando.
We don't have anybody in Ireland,
Like I found about I used to be really active in the loco, and as I've gotten busier and busier, I don't anymore. So I've struck a balance with my local team, where it's sometimes it's sorry guys, it's gonna be a late day. I'm not gonna be able to make it to Coffee House Coders. So that we get for me, I've kind of narrowed it down instead of going to a whole bunch of events and kind of stuff, where I go to the two major events and put more energy into that.
That's fair enough.
And the thing is, a lot of guys in local, in Michigan, they knew I was busy, right? And they're like, well, sorry, George couldn't make it today. He kind of is busy working on it. They know in April and October, I'm pretty much unavailable, right? But as soon as the release is out, we get together and we all celebrate.
With George.
But you have to find a balance, right?
Right.
Yeah.
That's why, I could never run a local team. There's no way I would.
And that's fair enough, but you actually make the content stuff, and you do too, Daniel. But
if nothing else, he sits in the IRC channel and talks.
Yeah, that makes such a big difference.
Huge.
but
It's 6 o'clock, by the way.
what I wanted to say is that inviting people is going to work much better than
You know what?
just exact.
Absolutely.